We're going to be talking about the metrics that matter. And my name is Dave Blake. I'm the founder and CEO of ClientSuccess, and so grateful to be here with all of our friends in the customer success community. Thank you for coming. And please, if you have any other friends who aren't here today, share the information. We'd love to have them come at one of our future webinars. Today, we're going to talk a lot about metrics. Now, there's a lot to cover. I think in the email we said we're going to do our top 10 metrics. I actually doubled that for you. So we're going to do 20 today. And we're going to cover a lot, and we'll go fairly quickly. There's a lot of definitions, a lot of calculations. Again, please share your feedback at metrics@clientsuccess.com if you have feedback, suggestions for more to add. And we'll compile all this in our recording and in some other content that we'll be able to share out with you so that you have the definitive guide to customer success and SaaS metrics. Today, we're going to focus on 4 categories of metrics today. The first one is revenue. Everything about revenue. Right now, revenue is king. It always has been and always will. As customer success teams, our job is to help maximize, retain, and grow that revenue. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the revenue metrics. We'll talk about health-related metrics, usage-related metrics, and what I would call experience-related metrics. Now, I'm going to cover a handful. I may not cover all that you expect, and I may cover some that you know very well that you've been using for years and years. And I hope that's okay. I hope that what we are able to find is a little bit more clarity on some other metrics you might use, or some to add to your dashboards or your regular measurement and reporting, and hopefully give you a perspective on some metrics that might be helpful to deepen your understanding and your use as you drive insights and analytics throughout your organization to take care of your customers, but also to help to grow and expand your company's business. So let's jump right in. Again, if you have questions, if you have a chat, jump it in the chat. If you have questions, send it in the Q&A and I'll watch those, and we'll hit some at the end. So let's jump in. All right, the first one we'll start on our revenue metrics. Let's jump in there. Now there's several that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today. We'll start with some of the basics: gross revenue retention, or GRR, net revenue retention, gross renewal rate, net renewal rate. We'll talk a little bit about the differences there. Customer logo or customer logo retention numbers, quick ratio, and CSQLs or CS qualified leads. Now, before we get into the details of these, there's a couple caveats and terms that I want to share. One is that just understand, now, as I go through these, realize that there are some people who calculate metrics differently. I tend to keep them very basic and use the most basic definitions or calculations that I've been able to find, or we have as a company. But some of these metrics can be calculated in very advanced ways. And again, Ed Powers is one who's very good about really helping understand advanced analytics and data-driven leadership. I tend to keep it simple, so you'll see that today everything that I've done has been very aligned to that philosophy of keep it simple. Some people use different metrics, so you may see some metrics in here that you may see some that are missing that you think, oh, Dave, you missed this one or that one. Hey, I get it. I'm just sharing you 20 that I really like. And certainly there's many more that I use and we report on internally or to our board that I haven't shared here. I typically have tried to focus on metrics that are more focused on the customer success team, those that you can impact in some way or another. Certainly not entirely, but you can impact or influence a lot of these metrics. But there are many others that I didn't include here that any SaaS business would also measure. The next thing I'd say is that sometimes people use different terms. Sometimes people use different terms differently. And then sometimes some focus on churn or what I refer to them as negative metrics, kind of the churn side of things. Others focus on retention, the opposite, which is the inverse, or the retention metrics, or what I would call positive metrics. I'm typically a glass half full guy. So I look at retention numbers versus churn numbers, and realizing that there's certainly the inverse, but that's where I'm going to focus today. Also for the presentation today, A lot of people report them in different styles, either ARR or MRR. I'm going to focus on ARR today, but certainly in most of these you could replace them with MRR and have a very similar calculation. I'm going to refer to expansion a lot, and that when if I do it all alone, just know that I'm also talking about two separate things, upsell and cross-sell. Again, those sometimes I've seen people use a different definition for upsell and a different definition for cross-sell. I typically say that upsell is more of the same products that they've already bought. And cross-sell is purchasing when a customer purchases a customer product or service that they've never had before. That's my definition. And again, your company might use a slightly different definition. Churn, sometimes I'll broadly talk about churn as a whole. But know that sometimes that means specifically churn. I've lost a customer and their revenue, or lost a product, and then downsell, which is I've kept the customer or the logo, but I've lost revenue from that. They've contracted. Sometimes we call it contraction, or other downgrades or different things. And then there's some interesting, as an example of using different terminology. Sometimes people use GRR, and some people might think of refer to it as gross revenue retention. Others might call it gross renewal rate. They're slightly different metrics, and I hope to unbundle that a little bit. And certainly those here, keep me honest if you have it. Now, again, there's a bunch of other metrics that we won't cover, unit economic metrics and those, but we'll focus on these metrics now. So let's jump in. So the first thing I just want to unbundle a little bit, which I find is somewhat confusing for many individuals, is the difference between revenue retention. When I talk about a revenue retention number versus a renewal rate, I don't know that this image does it justice, but basically in my mind, when I think of revenue retention, I'm thinking about the retaining revenue from a cohort of customers over a period of time. Including any what we call midterm upsell, downsell, or expansion, or contraction during that period, and also including the renewal. So it's everything, all the revenue changes during a particular period of time is what I would refer to as revenue retention. Whereas renewal rates are very specific to that renewal transaction. So I may have a customer that changes their revenue profile with me throughout the year. They may add seats, they may drop seats, they may drop a product, they may add products. That all the changes and dynamics for the individual period are inclusive from a revenue retention standpoint. Where if I'm talking about renewal rates, I'm very specifically talking to transactions that happened at and with the renewal. So certainly the renewal, but also any transactions that come with it. And depending on whether we're talking gross or net, we'll talk a little bit about that. But I just wanted to unpack that a little bit in slightly differentiating. And again, welcome any feedback on the chat if you can articulate that a little bit differently or look at it a little bit differently. But setting the stage, I just wanted to unpack those differences. So with that, let's first talk about gross revenue retention. Again, gross revenue retention is a key metric that everybody should pay attention to. The way that we've defined it is the percentage of recurring revenue, whether it be ARR or MRR, a company is able to retain for any given period. But gross revenue retention only considers the starting revenue and any lost or revenue through downsell or churn. So start with a certain amount of revenue in a certain cohort, and I watch any revenue that we've been able to retain, and those that and include those that are lost or downsell through lost through churn or downsell. You'll see a simple in all of these slides. You'll see a simple calculation. Again, we'll send these out so you don't. We've recorded this and we'll send this out so that you have them. But that's how we would look at it. Notice that in gross revenue retention, we're counting all the transactions, the revenue changes during the period for that cohort, but we're not including any expansion revenue. It's purely what we started with and what we lost, and therefore what we've retained. Gross revenue retention can never be above 100% because of that, because we're not including expansion. So there's no expansion that offsets it. So usually it's 100% or lower. And depending on your category, which customers you are targeting, your GRR may be in the 90s, 90 to 100, or lower if you're more mid-market and SMB, certainly down lower if you're in SMB. Okay, the next one, the companion metric is net revenue retention. This includes similar, but it does allow you to add expansion as the offset for churn or downsell. So this is any revenue a company is able to retain and expand for a given period of time, and it considers expansion revenue that offsets downsell and churn. Critical metric, and again, one that customer success team impacts in many different ways in driving value, helping to retain customers, and then driving expansion, whether it be cross-sell or upsell during a given time. Net retention, revenue retention, the benchmarks for that vary as well. Whether your many enterprise customers are over 100% net revenue retention, and then whether you're mid-market or SMB, it may be under 100%. But that's a key area. Gross renewal rate, this is where we'll distinguish. So when I think of renewal rates, it's very different. I'm talking about the change in revenue for those renewable dollars in any given period. I call the renewable dollars renewable book of business, RBOB. It's RBOB, renewable book of business. So we typically look at the starting renewable book of business for any given period. So whether it be a month, a quarter, or a year, and the gross renewals, how much of that we've been able to renew within that, only considering downsell and churn. We do not look at expansion revenue. So gross renewal does not include any offset from expansion revenue that happened at the time of the renewal. And again, the way we look at it is we're very specifically looking at the transactions, the renewal transaction, and any change in revenue at that time, with growth looking at downsell and churn against the renewable dollars. The next one is net renewable. This is where you do calculate it, where it offsets the expansion revenue. That is included as part of the renewal transaction. So you start with your renewable book of business, and you calculate it with that which is renewal minus downsell minus churn plus expansion over the initial renewable book of business. Okay, Ryan, I got a great question. He's asking, how does NRR and NDR differ? For me, they're interchangeable. Some people use them differently as separate metrics, but for me, they're interchangeable. I'm just looking at the dollars or the revenue retention. NRR is net revenue retention. NDR is net dollar retention. Similar things for me. Again, others might look at that slightly differently. Hopefully that helps, Ryan. Okay, another way to look at this, I like to see this. This is the way I love to look at it, which is what we call a renewal waterfall chart. So this, to me, again, everybody's different, but I like this because it helps me visualize where I start from and where I end. And so in this case, you look on the far left, the way that you read this is you look at your renewable book of business. So all the dollars that are up for renewal during that time period, and then you subtract the churn dollars. So if I start here and I subtract churn, I subtract any downsell during that period, that would give me my gross renewal. So renewable minus churn minus downsell is my gross renewal rate. Okay, renewable dollars or renewal rate. In this just random example, if you start at just under 350 in renewable book of business and you end at 284, it's about an 81.3% gross renewal. Now, to get to net renewal, you step back up. You've stepped down to gross and you step back up to net. So you have upsell that you add on top. In this case, in this example, there was no cross sell, and that gets you back to your net renewal, which in this case is right around a 99.4% in this example. So a formula of renewable minus churn minus downsell equals gross. Then you add to the gross the upsell and cross sell, and that's how you get to your renewal. Again, I love the waterfall chart. It just gives me a really good visual of what we're doing. This is an example of like, and you'll see some of these that we have in our product that our customers use and we use to be able to visualize all of these metrics throughout our platform and others. If you don't have a customer success platform like ClientSuccess, certainly any of these can be built out in spreadsheets. Sometimes it's just across spreadsheets and using dashboards within your spreadsheet. But this might be an example that you can look at this. Okay. Next one, customer or logo retention. I use it as either one. This tells me how many logos I'm retaining. And again, this is the inverse is customer churn or logo churn. But this is the percentage of customers I've retained over a given period of time. It's sometimes referred to as logo retention or customer retention. Basically, the way that you do it in a positive retention way is you take the customers at the end of your period, you'd subtract out any new customers because you're looking at a cohort, and then you divide that by the number of customers at the start of the period. So this is where you would be able to see the customer logo retention information for how you'd calculate customer or logo retention. The next one I'd share is one that I kind of like. It's interesting to kind of show the differences between growth in revenue and churn in revenue and loss of revenue. It's called quick ratio. And this measures growth efficiency for a SaaS company, comparing revenue growth that comes from new and expansion revenue versus revenue churn that happens through logo churn and downsell. You can see it's a very simple calculation. You just take all the new ARR and your expansion ARR and you divide it by downsell and churn ARR, and that gives you a ratio. And with that ratio, you can determine how efficient or how strong your growth rate is. When you get that ratio, you'll see that if the ratio is under 2, then you're having bad growth, is what they would say. And sorry, the graph wasn't exactly right, but you would have bad growth. That means you're losing too much revenue versus your new growth in revenue. If it's between 2 and 4, that's a healthy growth. And if it's above 4, that means you're strong growth. That means you're growing significantly more than you're losing revenue. So it's a really interesting metric to use to understand how the company is growing over time. The other way that you might look at this, I like it this way as well, is a dashboard like this, where you might see the blue is your new revenue, orange is expansion, red is churn, and yellow is downsell. So in any given month, if I just look at those, if I do a stack bar chart that goes positive and negative, you can just even visually see which months you're doing well versus you're not. So for example, in this month, not a bad growth ratio versus this month here in March, which is basically all the growth that I've had have been lost through downsell and churn. And so this is a really good way to kind of just quickly visualize to see whether your growth within your company is strong growth or not. Okay. Thank you for all who are sending in the questions. If you have questions or comments in the chat, questions put in the Q&A, and I'll get to those in a bit. Okay, next one. CSQ qualified leads. This is a good one. I think a lot of people have been doing this recently. Just kind of it helps us give attribution to customer success teams to understand how much we're driving new leads to the business. So CSQL is the number of qualified leads identified by the customer success teams for a potential expansion within the existing customer base. I kind of keep it very specific. I know that there's another metric that we use that we call second order revenue, which is how much influence in new revenue come from former customers. But this one is more focused on how many leads are you driving within the new customer base for expansion revenue. Now, sometimes some of you in the customer success teams like own the expansion revenue. So you're basically servicing these leads for yourself. They're self-service leads. Others pass that on to either the sales team or account management team or expansion team. And so you're passing those on for them to work these leads and drive them to closure. I think it's important to just keep track of them, and there's a couple different ways. These not necessarily a calculation, but just keep track of the total CSQLs that your team is driving, the number of deals that were closed, because certainly we want to optimize on closed deals, and then the amount of revenue closed, and so you can have proper attribution to your team. And so it's a helpful one. Some people like it, some people don't. Richard, I know that it's some people feel like CSM should not be involved in the sales process at all or not own revenue. I tend to disagree, but that's a debate for another day and another time. I'd love to have that with anybody. Okay, so those are the revenue metrics. Now, again, there could be a ton more. Those are just a handful that I would share today for you to consider. Let's move on to health metrics. Health metrics, just know that some of these are just general insights that you could share. Some of them are subjective. Some of them have to be very specific and tailored to individual customer or an individual company. But I wanted to share some ideas of things that hopefully you're doing. If not, maybe you could implement a few of these. So we'll talk a little bit about overall health scores. That's debatable whether it's a metric, but it's an indicator that I think it's important. A pulse indicator, which we'll share with you, time to onboard, time to first value, customer engagement metrics, and outcomes achieved. So let's dig into these and just as metrics or concepts as a whole. Health score. I hope everybody has some kind of health score. Again, I'm the kind of guy who is very keep it simple. So I do not tend to have very complex, overly verbose or complicated health scores. I'm all about really trying to dial into the simple, a few key metrics that are important. But basically, a health score is a composite score that helps you understand insights and hopefully leading indicators around customer risk and opportunity. I think a lot of people think of health scores as risk mitigation, but also if you do it right, it should be an area where you could really dial into opportunity identification. So from a health score perspective, there's a couple different things. Here's an example of kind of a framework that we have in our product, but there's a lot of different things that could go into a health score, whether it be product usage data, which we'll talk about later, engagement data, license utilization, support ticket information, CSAT or NPS data, billing information, are they paying their bills, other things, are they expanding or contracting? There's a lot of things, and frankly, every company, each of you will likely have at your company very different and unique health scores. There's not necessarily one health score framework or ideology that fits everybody. And so the process of defining your health score is a matter of experimentation, trial and error, and fine-tuning and calibrating over time. But if you can get there, it's beautiful. It allows you to have better insights, be able to be proactive on some metrics, maybe in some cases reactive, but you'd rather be reactive in some cases than be blindsided altogether. So my suggestion, my recommendation as health score is start simple. Focus on 3 to 5 metrics maybe, or indicators, and then expand. If yours has 20, 30, 40, my guess is that it may be too complex and it may be trying to be all things to everybody. If you found one with 20 or 30, kudos to you. Would love to hear about it, but start small and go from there. Okay. The other one, so this might be controversial, but I'm a big believer of data-driven insights around health, typically through an automated health score. Also, human-driven insights around health. Because a lot of times, and we're getting better and better as technology gets better and better, that data-driven, you can have false positives and false negatives. And so I am a really big believer, and our company is a big believer in getting insights from the team who are engaging with the customers on a daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis. We call it customer pulse. It's basically just a subjective indicator from the CSM who gives you an assessment of health. Usually it's a simple red, yellow, and green scale or some kind of that. with insights around and reason codes of why they are healthy or why they're a risk. We look at both factors. We look at risk factors, we capture those and report against those, and we also report and capture success factors. Because a lot of times you will have just as much success in improving your business of doubling down on those things that are working within your customer base as you will of solving the risk factors within your customer base. It's a secret sauce that you should consider, is measuring success factors as well as risk factors. So we do that, and we measure it in detail and do it through our product. We look at the number of customers in each status, and we look at the ARR in each status. Because you may have, if you have 100 customers, you may have 20 customers who are red, blaring red, but they may only contribute 5% of your revenue. Whereas you may have 3 customers that are red that contribute to 20% of your revenue. So it's really important to look at these numbers by customer count and by revenue. We tend to focus more on revenue than customer count because that usually is where we try to prioritize is revenue risk and revenue opportunity. The last one is to look at reason codes. Have a really good list of risk reason codes, categories and subcategories. Not too many. Again, keep it simple, but capture that information and report on it. And then every quarter, take your top 3 risk reason codes and work cross-functionally to try to remove those barriers and those experience challenges throughout your customer base. Then also do the same with your top success ones. Look at the top 3 success factors and figure out how you can double down on those or attract more customers who love those types of those successes through your product. So that's the next one. This is an example about how to build a matrix to definitions around different types of categories, how to report against them, both percentage wise and revenue wise, but also by reason codes. Certainly some examples that you could do to be able to track it, whether you do it in a customer success platform or in spreadsheets or whatever makes sense for you. Okay. Another one, and I'm looking at the time. I'll speed up a little bit. One that's really important is time to onboard. How long it takes. The average number of days it takes to successfully complete customer onboarding or to get a customer up and running and live. Certainly a key indicator. Customers don't buy our products to spend all of their time in onboarding. So one factor that might be interesting from a health standpoint, because churn starts with the go live, is to measure the time to onboard. It's just simply the number of days from kickoff to onboard complete to go live. And then look at it and say, hey, can we optimize this better? Can we bring it down from, I don't know, what might be in your product? Maybe it's 90 days to 60 days. Can we bring it from 60 to 30? Can we bring it to 30 to 10? Whatever it may be, how do you optimize that experience while still delivering a great onboarding experience to be able to make sure that the customer gets up and running quickly so they can leverage all the goodness of your platform? So that might be one. A companion metric that a lot of people like to use is time to first value. And that is maybe a little bit different than time to onboard, because sometimes people could receive value during the onboarding process. And that's a great best practice is have somebody have a wow experience with it as quickly as possible. Maybe the first day they log in, can they do something that brings value to them? So the time to first value is very different for each product. It could be during onboarding, it could be after onboarding, but how do you track that to be able to understand? Now, the key is figuring out what is the primary metric that you want to use that determines time to value. And that is the difficult part, is to look at all these different things that your customers could do or are doing in your platform and identify the magic metric that tells you that they've received first value. So with Slack, I believe it was the number of messages that were done within a Slack workspace. It's like 200 messages was when they determined that value was there. I can't remember if it was 200 or 2,000. But that was their definition of value, that value metric. So figure out what your value metric is and then measure it. Dustin had a good question. It seems like onboarding is an internal metric versus external. True, but it gives you an indicator of the external customer experience and gives you insights to improve that as an internal team to improve that. The other question about how do you define value? Value is different for everybody. The way that typically we would recommend is identify factor in your platform, some kind of value trigger or value workflow or outcome in your platform. Identify what that is. What is it customers are doing, and that adds immediate value that they would define as, yes, I've seen results, I've seen value. And try to find something that's consistent across all your customers and use that as the trigger, as the identifier there. The other one is to measure customer engagement. Certainly a healthy customer many times is an engaged customer. Engagement can be measured in different ways. One is direct engagement with the customer. Although in this day and age with product-led growth and other things, sometimes that's not always the case. Sometimes we have digital engagement. Sometimes we have high-touch engagement. But are your customers engaging with you, and are they engaging with the product? We'll talk about product metrics later, but this might be if you're the type of company and product where your customers would regularly, at some cadence, engage with you. That is really important to measure that. I always say embrace your most vocal customers and be worried about those that you don't hear from, because it's the silent customers that sometimes are the ones who don't care about. So different ways you can measure engagement was days since last touched. How many days since we've been able to engage with them? You could say last touched or last engaged. Those are two different ones. Some is like when did we last reach out to them? Another one may be when was the last time the customer engaged with us in either a phone call, meeting, message, email, or what have you. The number of touches might be important. How frequently are you engaging with your customers? And then the frequency. So is it monthly, weekly, quarterly? What's the frequency that makes sense for each of your customer segments and each of your customer base based on your particular product? Okay. And then the last one is outcomes achieved. I don't love the term outcomes. I know that a lot of people use that. I may say a few things that are controversial. I prefer goals or key business objectives. But basically, an ideal metric around health, we think this is kind of the best health indicator, is how often you're achieving a result for your customer. That may be standard objectives and results that your product is very clear that it delivers, or it may be goals, objectives, and business requirements that you define with your customer and document. So in our platform, we have a thing called goals where you can capture your customer goals and you can track them to completion. And so simply being able to do that, be able to understand how many goals you've been able to accomplish with your customer or for your customer, or outcomes or objectives, is a critical health indicator as well. If you're continuously helping to achieve customer objectives, it's highly likely that you'll be able to retain them over time based on experience and data. So some way of being able to capture that. This is as much art as it is science, I will say, because it is hard to do. But those who are able to do it, it's money to be able to do so. Okay. Some are asking if we're going to share the deck. Yes, we'll share the deck in one form or another, either as this deck or in a ebook. But happy to share this, and we'll also share the recording as well if you want to go back and look at that one as well. Okay, usage. We've got 2 more categories, and we've got about 20 minutes less than 20 minutes, so we'll go fairly quickly so we can get to some questions. Usage, I've only got 4 here. I distinguish between product usage and adoption. You might calculate license utilization and time spent. Certainly there's many more. I'm just touching on some of the basic ones that you should do it. One that I like from a product usage is daily active users versus monthly active users. Basically just like looking at the number of unique daily users in any given day who've logged into your platform as a percentage of the unique monthly active users. over the last 30 days or the last month. Just gives you an indication of like, are they coming frequently? What's the frequency of people coming back within the same month, and those types of things. Just a very standard product usage metric that might be helpful. The second one is that around product adoption. The differentiation between usage is more around frequency in my mind. Adoption is more on breadth of leveraging your product, and depth. Are they using broader features? And I think it's always best to, you can measure across all of your features, but I think it's really good to identify what we would call your value features. If you have 10 different features, are there 2 or 3 that drive the most value for customers, and are they using that at the breadth and depth that you would hope? So that's how I look at the difference between usage and adoption. And then the third one is license utilization. Again, some might look at these as the same, but basically saying for those that are selling seats still. Some people don't sell seats; they sell unlimited seats. Basically, just looking at the number of paid licenses or seats that are being used versus those that have been purchased in the contract. Certainly, if one of your customers paid for 50 licenses and they're only using 3, that's not a good thing. But if they're paid for 50 and they're using 50 and want 10 more, that's a great thing. So being able to track license utilization is a key indicator from a usage as well. Okay. And then the last one you might consider doing it, and there's some products out there that allow you to do this, is time spent in product. So this is basically how long they're in the product, how long a user is in a product. Now there are some products that somebody could log into every day for 1 minute and get tremendous value out of it. I use one of these products to myself. I look at this product every day, but I'm in it for like 30 seconds. And it still provides a ton of value. But there's other products like a product like ours, we would look for our customers to use our product every day, all day, because it's their primary platform to manage the customer experience and customer success. So we would want to see time in product for a long period of time. CRMs are like that, and other products are like that. So the key on this one is to really benchmark what you would expect to be the various benchmarks of good usage versus bad usage from a time spent and from a login perspective, and then measure your customers in that perspective and understand both who are your power users and also who are your customers who are at risk because they aren't using using seats or in the product enough or in the product frequency. So again, there could be a ton more usage metrics. Those are 4 that perhaps you could explore if you haven't done so already. Okay. The next one is experience metrics. So some might call these survey or whatever. I call them user experience, just to understand the overall user experience. Now, again, I know there's some haters out there on some of these metrics. Fair enough. My philosophy is any insights I can get around the overall customer experience and any feedback I can get from customers is super valuable. I'll take any feedback. I don't use these metrics to forecast my renewals on entirely, or to comp my CSMs or any of those. I simply use these metrics as various signals and ways to get customer feedback. The more I can get that, the better. And so we look for ways to get customer feedback in multiple ways. 3 here that you might look at is NPS, CSAT, and customer effort score. So NPS, again, a lot of people who hate NPS, who says this is old and outdated. I personally like it in the context in which I said, in that any feedback from me is helpful to understand the overall customer experience. So we certainly love to get feedback. It gives us insights. We're able to see it by profile. We know who our users are, which executive sponsors, which key contacts did, what score they all gave. So I can look at it by profile. I can look at it by those that have comments or not. Super helpful. And so again, you may not like NPS or think it's outdated. I would just encourage you to find any way you can, both quantitatively and qualitatively, to capture feedback and leverage that. Don't place any more weight on one than another. Just value feedback and ways to get it. So NPS is one for us. The easy way to do that is NPS stands for Net Promoter Score. It's a simple question of how likely would you recommend a product solution company to a friend or colleague, and it measures it on a 0 to 100. It's captured and calculated by looking at the percentage of promoters minus the percentage of detractors. And a key thing about any of these is it's not necessarily as important as the current NPS score or survey score. It's directionally, how are you improving or digressing over time, and look at those things. The other one is CSAT. It's the traditional CSAT, standard customer satisfaction, asking them to rate their satisfaction. Usually it's on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. Usually the reason why it's a 1 to 5 is so you keep it simple, where 1 is very unsatisfied or 5 is very satisfied. Typically, you just take the number of satisfied customers, so 4s or 5s, divided by the number of responses and times it by 1,000. That might be a way that you do it, or just an average of overall the scores. That one, I tend not to use this one, probably the least, frankly. And then the last one is customer effort score. I know a lot of people have used this. This is trying to gauge the ease of interactions that your customers have with your business. I love that there's a book called The Effortless Experience. The idea is like, how can we remove friction within the customer experience? And how do we make it easy for them to do business with us across all aspects of our business, whether it be paying bills, whether it be logging into our product, whether it be engaging with our support team, whatever it is. Customer effort score can help you gauge whether your customers feel like it's easy and effortless to do business with you, or whether it's difficult and they have to jump through a lot of hoops and just difficult to do business with us. I think many of us can think of companies that are hard to do business with, or you don't like to do business with them. CES is the customer effort score is scaled on a scale of 1 to 7, with 1 being difficult, very difficult, and 7 being very easy. Typically, you take the top three ratings, 5, 6, and 7, and divide that by the total of responses and times it by 100. Okay, so those are 3 different ways to look at that, to just get feedback, to gauge, to understand directionally where you're going, and be able to be able to understand. Obviously, all of these, if you can get comments, that's critical. That makes it so much better, so you have a little bit more context. We really try to encourage comments, even if it's simple 1-sentence comments, but they're super helpful. Okay, I've given you 20 metrics or 20 concepts that hopefully you can use. I have one more that's a bonus one that we introduced years ago. I know a lot of people have shared it over the years. We introduced it many years ago. We called it the ultimate question in SaaS. I love this question. This, write it down, it covers health, it could impact, helps revenue. It can be an experience one. But the simple question that we love to ask customers is this: if your renewal was today, would you renew? The reason why we call it the ultimate questions is it's a bold statement. It forces customers to think deeply about the value and the relationship that you have, and how they perceive you as a partner and as a product. And they have to answer it directly. So if you ask that customer, we do it sometimes at the end of calls, or often at the end of calls, or executive call, or QBR, or EBR, whatever you call them, or just a simple call at different stages in the partnership. But basically, say, if your renewal was today, would you renew? If they say yes, then it's like, great. We don't rest on our laurels, but we understand that we have some validation that we're driving value, that they perceive the partnership to be valuable, and that there's some level of confidence that they will renew. If they say no, you better ask some follow-up questions about why they wouldn't renew and what they could do quickly and over the course between now and the renewal date to change their answer from a no to a yes. And if it's a maybe, you ask a follow-up question, what can I do to earn a yes? So sometimes they say, possibly, I don't know if I could tell you now, but maybe. Then you ask the follow-up question and you dive in and ask the other questions, which is what can I do to earn a yes? Money question. We love it. It's straight to the point. It's bold, but it really gets customers to think deeply and allows you to dive in and understand what the true health of the relationship is and the propensity to renew. So hopefully that's helpful. All right. So we've covered some metrics in revenue, health, usage, experience. Obviously, all of these are interrelated, and hopefully you're already tracking many of these and putting them to work in your business. Hopefully you're already sharing them with the rest of your company. You're taking the lead on capturing them and sharing them and driving action from them. But if you are looking for just some best practices, if you're looking at this and you're like, Dave, oh my goodness, 20 metrics? I can't even do 2 right now, and you feel maybe overwhelmed. My suggestion is just to start simple. Start with 2 or 3, maybe 1 or 2 in each category. Discuss them and align with your executive team on capturing those and the value of them. Figure out how you're going to collect the data. That's really important. How you're going to report on the data. Figure out what the baseline is for each one. So that's really important to take a baseline so you know if you're progressing or digressing on each metric and work to improve. Then roll them out to your internal teams in the broader company. And then hopefully you're sharing these to provide the visibility in your weekly meetings, your monthly town hall reviews as a company, your quarterly reviews, and your annual reviews. The more confident you are in being able to discuss your metrics and these KPIs and these concepts, the more you'll represent your team that much better, and you'll establish confidence with your executive team, with your boards, and with your customers.